Welcome to the second annual State of Early Care in Education. My name is Jennifer Ehrbacher, and on behalf of Early Learning Indiana, we'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for this extremely important topic. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Everyone is muted to ensure audio quality, so if you have a comment or question, please drop it into the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll address them at the end of the presentation. And we are recording today's presentation, and we plan to send that out to those who have registered. We will also post it to Early Learning Indiana's website, earlylearningin.org. Also, a technical note, we are having trouble showing webcams, so you will not see our faces today. You'll just see the presentation as we go. And now I would like to introduce Maureen Weber. Maureen has served as President and Chief Executive Officer of Early Learning Indiana since March 2018. In her role, she leads a team that is relentlessly focused on three key priorities. First, transforming the early learning industry by addressing systemic barriers to accessible, affordable, and high-quality early education. Second, sharing expertise to build system capacity and improve learning outcomes. And lastly, operating a network of 10 community-based day early learning centers that advance the science of early education, invest in a new generation of teaching, and instill essential skills in the children they serve. With a background in organizational strategy and execution, Maureen has spent her career working across multiple sectors, including education, healthcare, and state government. She chairs the board of Purdue Polytechnic High School, serves on the board of the Notre Dame ACE Academy's Indianapolis network of schools, and is a member of the Community Advisory Board for Goodwill of Central and Southern Indiana's Nurse Family Partnership Initiative. And now I would like to turn it over to Maureen.
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Early Learning Indiana Board and our team, I'm so pleased to welcome you today to our second annual State of Early Learning conversation. We're grateful to be joined today by statewide and community partners, members of our Day Nursery Auxiliary, and other supporters of our 10 Day Early Learning Centers. I've spent much of the last 6 months on the road from South Bend to Clarksville and many places in between, learning from other early learning providers, civic and religious leaders, and higher education experts. I hope to hear your thoughts and experiences from our conversations reflected in these remarks. The weight of the last 2 years has been heavy at times, but we are truly buoyed by your support and collaboration. Given the work of so many of you, the short-term availability of unprecedented federal funding, and state and local leaders committed to facilitating change in this sector, we are more optimistic about the state of early learning than ever before. If you've joined this call, then you know that high-quality early learning opportunities provide a multi-generational impact by empowering children to build the foundational skills necessary to flourish while enabling their parents to actively contribute to the labor force. We often talk about the challenges of early learning at a systems level, looking at levers like the lack of sufficient seat capacity, the shallowness of our talent pool, and the struggle to maintain a focus on quality practices while working in a highly regulated environment and coping with the fallout of a pandemic that has outlasted the tolerance of even the most patient among us. It's important that we understand these details, and I'll say more about them shortly. But what is sometimes lost in that complexity are the implications for an individual child. For all Hoosier children, but especially the most vulnerable among us, the opportunity to access a truly high-quality early care and education environment, complete with nutritious food, meaningful relationships with caring adults, and opportunities to develop essential skills, has the potential to transform the very architecture of the brain. Embedded in that architecture are the seeds of all future learning: resilience, persistence, flexible thinking strategies, and effective communication skills. Recent iLearn data and the achievement gap that it revealed for low-income and Black students makes us anxious to ensure that all children have the opportunity to gain these foundational skills. The potential value of an effective early learning sector in which children are achieving or surpassing expected learning outcomes while their parents are participating in the workforce is self-evident. The factors preventing this promise from being fully realized, however, are many, including a profound and persistent talent vacuum and financial and operation models that are sometimes working at cross purposes with each other. Since late 2020, federal spending has injected more than $1 billion into early learning in Indiana through a combination of pandemic-related stabilization funding for providers and an expansion of family-facing benefits. This level of spending, almost 4 times a typical year, was almost unimaginable when we first met together just a short year ago. It presents an opportunity to consider the art of possible in order to capitalize on the elusive promise of this work for children, families, and Indiana's workforce. However, there is much work to do if we are going to take full advantage of this once-in-a-generation investment. Let's start with the issue of access. In our recent Closing the Gap report, we considered 4 dimensions of access, including the overall capacity of seats available, the quality of those seats, whether they are affordable to families in a local community, and the degree of choice that parents have in picking the type of care they need. In carrying out this analysis, Eli created a new metric we termed the Early Learning Access Index, which looked at these 4 factors. Overall, Indiana has an Early Learning Access Index score of just over 60 on a scale of 1 to 100, driven by a moderate supply of early learning seats, relatively high marks for the range of choices available, and a general insufficiency of high-quality offerings. On average, rural communities are less well-served than urban centers. This report gives us a clearer picture than we've ever had before, but it still doesn't tell the complete story. It doesn't account for continuing staffing challenges or take into account the unique barriers facing families whose children have special needs, for example. We'll continue to refine our work, but in the meantime, our colleagues in the Child Care Resource and Referral Network are embedded in communities throughout Indiana, helping local leaders evaluate the nuances of their data and make plans to address these gaps. If you haven't yet had the opportunity to connect with your child care resource and referral experts, I encourage you to do so soon. To support local communities in their efforts to respond to these needs, and with the generosity of the Lilly Endowment, in 2021, Early Learning Indiana awarded 17 capacity building grants to communities with shovel-ready projects to add new early learning seats. Having watched this work getting underway in Shelbyville and Boone County and elsewhere, we couldn't be more enthused by the ingenuity we're seeing through these projects. We look forward to learning the lessons of these different efforts and sharing them with all of you. Through a separate initiative supported by the United Way of Central Indiana, by our Day Nursery Auxiliary, and so many of you, we continue to grow the capacity of our own day early learning centers too, adding 2 centers in partnership with Purdue University in 2021, and with construction underway on an additional site at Crystal House Academy's Manual High School location, due to open this summer. While we continue to invest in building targeted supply, we also have to make the most of the supply that we have. As we start 2022, there are numerous efforts aimed at this objective. First, to help existing providers sustain and grow their businesses, our friends at Spark Learning Lab have been offering intensive business supports through learning cohorts, one-on-one business coaching, and local business events which connect early learning providers with financial planning, tax and audit, and legal services. Their leadership in this area is helping to strengthen the current supply while also building the ecosystem of industry supporters all around the state. Second, Early Learning Indiana is helping communities of providers aggregate their administrative costs through 7 shared service pilot hubs operating across the state. Through this initiative, which we call Stronger Together, communities like Wabash and Monroe County are helping providers work together to engage in joint purchasing, shared hiring practices, and other cost-saving efforts. There's more work we can do here. Lastly, we have to fill the existing seats just as efficiently as we can. The child care market is deeply fragmented and difficult to navigate. As a result, providers can't take advantage of economies of scale, and parents are left to check for availability by navigating from one potential provider to the next. This lack of timely, accurate information prevents providers from achieving enrollment goals and is a source of consternation for families in search of care. This spring, we'll launch our Early Learning Marketplace, an online market that will enable families to search open seats in real time, built with the support of the Lilly Endowment and shared with providers and families statewide through investments by the state of Indiana. As challenging as it is to ensure access for all young children, market incentives alone are particularly insufficient to drive the creation of high-quality supply for infants and toddlers. Low staff-to-child ratios and infant and toddler rooms make services to the very youngest children the most costly. As such, nearly a third of providers don't offer them. Indeed, 14 counties had no licensed infant care at all as of our Closing the Gap report. On the other side of the spectrum, higher ratio pre-kindergarten classrooms serve as revenue centers that are critical to the viability of an entire operation. We don't object to family decisions to send their children to pre-kindergarten in public schools or by other pre-kindergarten operators. But as a matter of public policy, we must acknowledge that the movement of relatively more profitable pre-kindergarten seats to these settings has slowly been eroding the financial viability of full-service community-based early learning providers, further exacerbating the precariousness of future infant and toddler supply. One task for all of us for 2022 then, in Indiana and really throughout the country, is to incentivize providers to serve infants and toddlers through higher reimbursement rates for those age groups, targeted philanthropic support, and investments in educators who are skilled in serving our youngest children. In short, we have to pay providers of resource-intensive infant and toddler care what it costs to provide that service, rather than expect that these costs will continue to be covered by serving older children. The dynamics have changed. Let's turn next to the quality of early learning services. Studies have consistently demonstrated that the magnitude of the outcomes achieved by early learning services is closely connected to the quality and intensiveness of the services provided. Makes sense. The quality of Indiana's early learning system, defined by the outcomes that we are designed to achieve, is largely unknown, but there is significant work underway to help us learn more. As you can see from our Closing the Gap report, a little more than a quarter of Hoosier children can be served by the current high-quality supply. Spark Learning Lab's work here is helping to drive provider enrollment in Indiana's Paths to Quality system. Despite the very real distractions of the pandemic, we know that progress continues. Spark reports that 7% of Paths to Quality enrolled programs have advanced at least one quality level. Even as we strongly encourage more early learning providers to join Paths to Quality, we are committed to helping to modernize our understanding of quality by looking more closely at the outcomes that children are achieving, including early literacy and math skills, and the social and emotional development that is the hallmark of effective early learning. Toward that end, we are mid-stride in a demonstration project undertaken in partnership with the National Institute for Early Education Research. This study is currently researching several hundred classrooms, including family child care homes, child care ministries, licensed centers, and others, to better understand the level of instructional practice occurring statewide. We look forward to sharing interim results with you and with policymakers in the coming months. Within our day early learning centers, we have several initiatives underway to influence our own instruction. First, through the support of Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation in partnership with PNC, we are implementing an evidence-based program from NORC at the University of Chicago called Getting on Track. This program is enabling our teachers to more closely monitor children's performance in essential math and language skills and empower our educators with new tools to adjust their practice to the learning needs of individual children in real time. Like all work in our centers, we approach this project with an eye towards replicating successful practices. Second, through the generosity of Indiana University Health, we are undertaking an initiative to implement and research the impact of positive childhood experiences delivered by early learning programs to serve as a counterweight to the adverse experiences we know too many children in our state endure. We'll be recruiting other early learning providers working in communities served by IU Health hospitals to join us in this work in 2022. I would be absolutely remiss to talk about quality without acknowledging that the primary driver of quality in early learning is the effectiveness of the adults in a classroom or family child care home. As some of you have heard me say before, the early learning workforce is low wage, but undeniably high value. As wages rise in other industries, compensation rates in our sector severely threaten our ability to attract effective teachers. Indeed, the latest national labor data shows many industries gaining ground in combating the workforce shortages we've all experienced, while childcare workers continue to exit the industry by the thousands. Our own survey of Hoosier providers taken late last fall estimated as many as 1,500 workers in Indiana recently left early learning jobs for other industries. In response to this shortfall, predictably, providers statewide, especially large urban providers, are closing off capacity. In addition to chronically low compensation rates, these high turnover rates are driven by hectic year-round teaching schedules, lack of visibility to career pathways, lack of classroom and instructional support, and stressful work environments. I'm not sure these factors have ever been more pronounced than over the past few weeks as Omicron has surged through our state, disrupting every aspect of our already fragile work. Given this challenge, workforce development must take center stage for our efforts in 2022. Indiana has a flexible system that allows us to take advantage of competency-based preparation models that reduce costs and speed time to productivity, including models that Early Learning Indiana has recently designed with support from Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation and others. In 2021, we piloted the first such program, a 13-week-long job-embedded initiative with 20 of our own classroom support professionals. Thanks to the United Way of Central Indiana, we're now partnering with other local providers to train up their teams. If you are an interested provider, please connect with us. We're also collaborating with Butler University to launch a new cost-effective model for training instructional leads or teachers. Stay tuned for more details about that in the months ahead. The state of Indiana, as many of you know, is in the process of spending approximately $541 million in stabilization grants made possible through the American Rescue Plan. The pace of these investments, set forth by federal requirements, may not allow us to absorb these dollars for true quality improvement unless we as providers harness these short-term dollars for long-term gain. Our board has committed to using these temporary resources to prove out the case we've long advocated for, that if we pay early educators more and train them differently, we can attract and sustain an effective workforce capable of optimizing learning for the children that we serve. More than 2/3 of the federal funding that we've received has been earmarked for our frontline team members, addressing both compensation rates and working conditions. Even still, we recognize that this experiment may be short-lived, leaving more disruption in its wake. To sustain these workforce gains after American Rescue Plan's funds have dissipated, we have 3 wish list items for federal and state policymakers. First, reevaluate the treatment of high-demand, high-value career and technical education programs to ensure that we're opening this gateway into the early education industry. Second, invest in higher education programs and alternative workforce pathways that marry rigorous instruction with meaningful opportunities to practice and receive feedback, with a relentless focus on creating and maintaining time-efficient and cost-effective paths to true classroom readiness. And ultimately, if we and other early learning providers can demonstrate the benefits through our strategic use of stabilization grants, increase public spending for early learning services so that market forces can drive workforce compensation to more competitive levels. Our last factor in considering the health of the early learning sector is inextricably connected to the other 2. How affordable are early learning services for families? As of mid-2021, the overall cost to income ratio for childcare in Indiana was 11.8% and approaching 16% in some counties. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services considers care affordable if it does not exceed 7% of a household's income. The cost of obtaining high quality care is simply out of reach for many Hoosier families. Statewide, the average pre-pandemic cost of care for a preschooler in an early learning setting was just over $9,000. It was more than $12,000 for an infant. While we don't have reliable current tuition estimates yet, we know that 80% of programs have increased wages to support their workforce, creating more upward pressure on rates that were too often not sufficient to cover pre-pandemic costs. Commendably, the state of Indiana, through the Family and Social Services Administration, has leveraged federal stimulus dollars to support families' access to care by waiving co-payments for low-income families and investing approximately $100 million in Build, Learn, Grow scholarships, supporting families of working individuals in essential industries. We have been honored to administer this program on the state's behalf in close partnership with the Indiana After School Network. At year end, more than 16,000 children had received scholarships, lowering families' costs for early learning or out-of-school learning programs. This initiative, which continues through mid-2022, is teaching us a lot about the results that we might achieve through increased federal investment on a more sustained basis. We'll leave worthy debates about the extent of such increase to others, but it's clear that many low-income working families are left out of the current formula. In addition to advocating for increasing federal support for low-income and so-called ALICE families, we encourage employers to continue to explore the role that they might play in helping their workforce offset the costs of high-quality early care. As noted in the recent Business Equity for Indy Task Force report, employers committed to a diverse workforce might leverage early learning savings accounts and other investments to help meet the needs of their current employees while planning for their talent pipeline 15 or more years down the road. Lastly, especially because we're gathered together this morning while the Indiana General Assembly is meeting just a few blocks away, I wanted to share a few thoughts about the current legislative session. As a member of the Early Education Works Coalition, led by United Way of Central Indiana, Early Learning Indiana was delighted to see that Governor Holcomb's next level agenda included significant support for early learning through the creation of a new Office of School Readiness at the Indiana Department of Education and certain other measures. Specifically, we believe that House Bill 1093 holds much promise for the way forward. This bill calls for strengthening the Early Learning Advisory Committee by tasking it with certain new responsibilities, including setting clear child development and educational goals for our early learning system, designing a way to measure progress against those goals, evaluating the efficacy of state and federal spending on early learning services, and assessing whether our current licensing system creates equitable standards for health and safety while supporting the educational purpose of this work, among other good things. Obviously, this bill is just the beginning, and the real work will be in the details that follow. But the old saying about making hay while the sun shines applies here. Although the work is harder than ever, federal spending has brought a touch of sunlight to our sector, creating an opportunity to rethink the fundamentals. This legislation will create a forum for state leaders to reimagine the early learning system, simplifying the overall structure to remove redundancy and complexity while increasing consistency and quality of outcomes. Moreover, it will enable policymakers to grapple with the challenges of sustaining a supply of early learning capacity in what we expect will continue to be a funding-constrained environment. There has long been bipartisan support for early learning investment, but the sheer magnitude of the challenges has led to inertia. The entire nation is now trying to determine how to leverage one-time American Rescue Plan funds to fortify the early learning industry against the ongoing crisis we have faced for decades. In this most unusual moment, Indiana has an opportunity to solve the puzzle presented by the recent influx of federal funding by designing a system around the needs of vulnerable families that unleashes a thriving early learning sector capable of sustaining itself. There's room for everyone in this work. At its core, a system designed to level the playing field for Hoosier children starts with a clear purpose and high expectations. It's built to enable those results, driving key inputs like an effective workforce, while reducing distracting barriers like multiple layers of compliance. It takes a rational approach to public funding, normalizing around the child rather than the funding source, to empower families with as many choices as possible. It demands operational efficiency from all of us while fostering innovation to ensure that scarce resources are optimized and the entrepreneurial talent is attracted to the work. And it has an unyielding focus on outcomes in recognition of the extraordinarily high stakes. Given the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic and the avalanche of federal funding that followed, policymakers and community leaders are operating in the most target-rich environment of our lifetimes. Some may reasonably doubt whether a new approach to early learning is a sufficient response to the multiplicity of factors influencing a child's development and ultimate success in life and learning. But surely in this moment of unparalleled public spending, the cost of which will ultimately be borne by the very generation we have the opportunity to serve, there is both a moral and financial imperative to make the attempt. Whatever interest brought you here today, I simply can't thank you enough for your contributions to this effort. We're anxious to continue our conversation and hope to hear questions asked by many of you as we muddle through our technical challenges here. I think my colleague Jen Ehrbacher is going to come back on and ask some questions that have been posed throughout our talk.
Yes, I am here. Oh, go
My
ahead.
friend Dan Valentine from the United Way of Central Indiana, who I know is at the State House this morning. So to the extent she is able to join in, then she'll help answer any of the legislative related questions that you all might have out there. So let's hear them.
Okay, so as a reminder, the webcams are not working, which is why you cannot see our faces. If you have a question, pop it in the questions box and we will go through those here shortly. So the first question we have, Maureen, could you share a little bit more about what's happening in the state legislature?
Sure, and if Anne's able to join, I might invite her to do that. I don't know, Anne, if you're able to chime in or if you're in committee hearing as we speak.
I am not. Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm in what used to be called a phone booth in the State House. So House Bill 1093 is the one that is moving, that has language around childcare that as Maureen said, it's part of the governor's legislative agenda. It's been approved by the House. It will be taken up by the Senate, probably beginning the first full week of February. There are a couple of other bills related to childcare. There's one coming up for second reading in the House today, authored by Representative Snow, that would exempt K-12. It's House Bill 1318. If a school, K-12 school system, wants to also offer birth to 5 programs, they would not need to be licensed and regulated out of FSSA. There were quite a few folks who testified from Representative Snow's district on that. Our coalition is just keeping an eye on it. We believe there ought to be a resetting of the regulatory environment, but not, and that this bill really sort of obscures that need, which I believe FSSA is going to be embarking on soon. Other than that, most of the attention in the State House and energy is focused on K-12 issues and not much in childcare. The other thing I would just add that's been an interesting, encouraging part for our coalition this year is the engagement from the business community has really increased around the need for childcare, because they have heard from employers that that's one of the biggest hurdles to hiring staff, is the lack of accessible and affordable high quality care throughout the state. And so legislators are beginning to pay, that perhaps may not have paid attention to it before, are understanding that there's a business impact, an economic impact as well for the state. So I don't think we're going to see a lot more than 1093 addressing childcare coming out this session, but it does, I think, set us up well for a budget year next year. Anything else, Maureen, that I might have missed that we've talked about before?
No, I think you've covered it beautifully. We're ready for our next question. Jen, keep giving the hard ones to Anne.
And Anne, you said that was House Bill 1093, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we had someone ask for a clarification there. We have a question. What's being done to address the issues regarding equity in funding by geographic location and type of facility?
Yeah, I think that, so there's a bill that has been moving. I don't know if it's going anywhere or not, but that addresses that issue, I think, more broadly. As the Early Learning Advisory Committee is tasked with looking at how state and federal spending is occurring all across Indiana, this will be a perfect topic for that group to consider, and to make sure that we feel that state leaders feel that there is equitable spending across geographies, across different settings of care.
Andrew Smith with WRTV6 asks if you could talk a little bit about what the career paths are in early learning. You mentioned there's a lack of knowledge around what they are, and what is the reason for that lack of knowledge?
Sure, and I'll take this from the approach of our own day early learning centers, if I may. You know, we employ several hundred early educators, and we're so just proud of and thankful for them over the past, well, forever, but especially over the past 2 years in the work that they've done. You know, our folks enter the field through what we call our classroom support professional roles, and those really are designed to help make the classroom operate smoothly, help make sure, as you can imagine, with large groups of young children, that everyone sort of knows their place in the room and is kept busy at all times. From there, we hope that folks who are interested will continue on a path to become that lead teacher in a classroom or the primary instructional lead. And that person is really responsible for setting the work of the classroom, helping to figure out what are all the different areas of interest, or centers as we call them in our world, where children may move from one part to the next. They're the ones that kind of decide, okay, when are the children done with a certain topic and ready to move on to something else? And that happens a bit more fluidly in the early learning environment than it happens in K-12 education. So these are really expert facilitators that are helping children explore the world around them and support their own learning. From there, we have, again, in this case, drawing from what we've learned about an opportunity culture in K-12, we have a team lead role that allows people to continue to stay in their classroom and lead the children in that classroom, but also gives them an opportunity for career growth, allowing them to lead their peers and contribute to the learning of the other adults in the building as well. And we know this is really important because in early education, like in lots of other areas, we make this fundamental mistake that we take the people who are best at what they do and we move them out of what they do and put them in administration or elsewhere. So that team lead role really allows us to capitalize on some of the very best teachers that we have while giving them room to continue to grow. And then ultimately we have school leader positions as well that are really setting the instructional tone for an entire building. And we hope that our teachers who have an interest in administration and management will kind of continue up the ladder there. So I think there are lots and lots of opportunities and ways for people to become involved in the early care and education field.
And this question is related to the workforce development issue. Recruiting and retaining talented teachers seems like the place we need to start. How do we not get overwhelmed by the magnitude of this problem? And what is a local provider to do?
Oh, it's such a good question. And well, first of all, call us, because on a daily basis, we're having that conversation with each other. It's such a challenge. And especially right now, when I talk often with our team members and I always ask them, if you weren't working here, what would you be doing? And sometimes I get the answer back that I would always be doing this work. I can't imagine doing anything else. And other times, there are folks that are finding the competition in the market from, the Amazons and FedEx and those kinds of roles that can simply compensate better than we can to be almost too hard to pass up. And I understand that from the perspective of their own family needs and finances, even if they love doing this work. And so, I think for us, we have added sign-on bonuses. We have started recruiting in unusual places and making sure that we are turning over every stone to find folks. We are also really investing, as I said in my remarks, in retaining the wonderful team members that we currently have. I will say that notwithstanding all of those things, and we have probably put more focus and energy towards this in the past 8 months than in the prior however many years, and it was always a really hard challenge. It's still not bearing a lot of fruit. We have more work to do to help people understand the value of this work, and at the very earliest ages, as part of their high school career, show this to them as a viable career pathway for them. So what I can offer up right now is to commiserate with you, and then together we'll work on the longer term priorities.
And Jeannie asks another related question. What changes could or need to happen at the federal level to help address workforce needs or help providers in rural areas specifically?
Yeah, I do think the idea of alternative pathways is one that is helpful. Some of the work that we and I know others are doing, it's more like an apprenticeship model, and that enables people to get a taste of what this work is like. And one of the things we know is that the more I understand the work, and if I'm onboarded into the work, in a smooth fashion, that's going to help me feel more confident, which is ultimately going to make me more willing to stay. And so I think really looking at those pathways that create lots and lots of opportunities for people to be engaged in the work and understand how it looks day in and day out is one thing that is going to be really important, and that policymakers at all levels can support in different ways, whether through their commitment to different training programs, or looking at the regulatory environment in which we operate and making sure that there aren't any barriers that we've inadvertently put in our own way.
There's one more question related to this topic. It's an important one. Are there any incentives to retain childcare professionals by paying proper starting wages to pull and retain talent? And where are funds to provide healthcare incentives and retirement plans?
Oh, goodness. Well, I know that the state of Indiana is doing some work through Spark Learning Lab. And if anyone is on from Spark and wants to chime in, we'll figure out how to make that possible. But, to really look at employee assistance programs and helping to make those more broadly available. I will say, I think the fundamental challenge is that we have to decide that having a viable, sustainable early care and education sector is an important public good, and we have to invest accordingly. And I think, we're seeing more and more momentum on all sides of the aisle around that issue. I think we just have to stay after it. Say too, I think we as providers need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, and it feels almost crazy to say it. I'm sure those of you providers who are out there are like, are you kidding me, Weber? But truly, there is always more that we can do, and we have to think about, should we be constructing our businesses differently? If I'm running a family child care home, can I connect with one or two others so that together we can get the advantages of scale and bulk purchasing, those types of things. So I think there's work for definitely policymakers to do. There's also work for the industry ourselves.
All right, switching gears just a bit, how are ECE facilities evaluated for kindergarten readiness?
Yeah, so a great question. So there was in 2021, we the state of Indiana administered the kindergarten readiness indicator, which was an assessment of kindergarten readiness for children who are participating in the On My Way pre-K program. And so that is going to give us, I don't think we've seen the results published yet, but that's going to give us some indication of how we're doing on essential math and early literacy skills. And we know that those are incredibly important. We also know they don't tell the whole story. And so there are various folks who have been looking at what else do we need to know about how children are doing so that we can create a more complete picture of whether the early care and education system is kind of giving children everything that they need. And if not, then what do we need to do to adjust our practices to make sure that we are? Because we're all spending a whole lot of time on this, and I know that you, like me, want to make sure that we're getting kind of the maximum bang for our investment.
This one is a family-related question. You mentioned the early learning marketplace. It sounds like it will change the way families find high-quality care. Will it open to all families, and will all providers have an opportunity to participate?
Oh, thank you so much for that question, Jen. Yes and yes. So all families in the state of Indiana will be very welcome to use the early learning marketplace, and we hope that all providers will want to put their open seats on the marketplace as well. That's going to help kind of create the best experience for everybody involved, and help really efficiently kind of transact and sell seats just as quickly as we can. The worst thing for those of us who are in this work, one of the worst, is knowing that we have a seat open, that if we could just find the right child, we could be serving them today. It's bad for our business if there's not a child in that seat, and it's, of course, really bad for the children that we serve. So we're very excited about the promise of the marketplace.
Is there a plan for families who are relying on the Build, Learn, Grow scholarship funding when the funding ends in June? Do you know?
That's a good question, and I think, I'm certain that folks at the state of Indiana are thinking deeply about that. I will say that we as a provider are also thinking about it. We have tuition assistance funds that we make available to families of our day early learning centers who are at certain income levels. And so I'm hopeful that with the stabilization funds that are flowing to providers right now, other providers might create those same kinds of funds and make those transition dollars available. I will say I've heard from local communities as well, and I know that there are several communities around the state that are trying to establish a comparable kind of fund that could come into play at times like these when the federal dollars are going away, as wonderful as they have been for the last year or more.
Great, I'm just reading through these very quickly. Someone asked if you know the state of the iStar KR.
I don't. I'm probably not the best suited to answer that one, although I'm certain that folks at the state of Indiana would be happy to weigh in.
There are a lot of questions related to staffing, so that seems like the big important topic of the day. Angela asks if there are Indiana colleges or universities willing to partner with this initiative. She mentions a high school graduation pathway that allows students to graduate high school with a CDA. Is that something that could be expanded, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we think there's lots of possibility to work more closely with high schools through career tech ed programs and other ways. And I know that the Indiana Association for the Education of Young Children is doing a lot of work to expand into those pathways as well. I will say from our standpoint, we've had a lot of interest from local colleges and universities and are really asking ourselves, what is the best way to get the programming that we've developed embedded into other structures, for example, the community college system, so that more people can have access to it statewide.
You mentioned early on in the presentation the achievement gaps for low income and Black students. What can we do to help improve that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that the work that we do every day is critical to sending those numbers in a different direction. We know that there are differences in access to early learning services among children who are low income or, including many who are just over the line for child care and development fund dollars, but have not been able, historically at least, to then access subsidy or other supports. And so really, I think that the work of the early learning community that we do each and every day is one of the very best bets that we as a state can make to level that playing field and help make sure that that foundation is set. And so I think we need to be really focused in making sure that there is equity in the way that we are approaching the work, both from an access standpoint and the learning itself. So I suspect there's more work that we all need to do there. It's certainly the case in our centers, but if we're seeing an achievement gap, developing among our 3- and 4-year-olds, we should not be surprised to see that perpetuated in K-12. So we've got to solve for it earlier.
I think one of our final questions here is related to employers. What can employers do to address the needs of the childcare needs of their employees?
Yeah, great question. So we are always delighted to work with employers, as I know that others around the state, and certainly the Child Care Resource and Referral Network as well, to help think through the needs of your employee base, your team members, to understand what solutions might be available. We have examples of all kinds of good things around the state, everything from places like IU Health, where they have invested in providing a center on site or near site for their team members, to other places that have invested in partnerships with local providers so that they reserve certain seats for their team members in those places, or that just make sure that their team members have access to dependent care accounts through which they can get a little bit of a tax break for investing in early care services. So we're glad through our early education or early learning work service line to talk with employers, but also can connect you with resources all around the state.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If you have other questions we have not gotten to, you can feel free to email those into us at the email address info@earlylearningindiana.org. And as a reminder, we will be sending out the link to this recording via email to all of those who registered after this presentation. And it will also be posted on the Early Learning Indiana website at earlylearningin.org. Maureen, anything else?
No, I just want to thank everybody for gathering today and for the work that I know is going on. As I said a few minutes ago, truly this last few weeks has been, I think, at least for us, among the most difficult. And I just am so appreciative of the work that I know is happening in literally every corner of the state to make a difference here. So thank you for being here today and for your continued partnership as we work to serve the youngest Hoosiers. Thanks so much.